Here
The
is your main
evening
course.
sun was sinking
Thank
behind
you.
the city skyline, painting the tall windows of La Serenata in streaks of gold, while inside the restaurant a warm hum of voices blended with the clink of glasses and the faint sound of a violin drifting from the speakers, giving the place a refined and nostalgic charm. Among the polished wooden panels, soft sconces casting their glow, and classical paintings framed in ornate gold, the staff moved with trained precision, and among them was Elena Marquez, the young waitress in a crisp, white shirt and fitted black vest, whose every movement was practiced, but whose mind carried dreams of another life, a life where she played the piano on a stage instead of balancing trays. She had worked here for 2 years, supporting her sick mother, burying her ambitions, and hiding her love for music behind polite smiles. Yet something about this night was about to draw her path, closer to a man she had never met. At a corner table sat Victor D'Angelo, 60 years old, silver-haired, dressed in a formal suit, his hands resting on the table as he stared into nothing with a thoughtful heaviness. A man who had built an empire in finance, yet paid the price of solitude. For his children lived abroad, and his wife, who once adored this very restaurant, had passed away a decade earlier, leaving him to fill evenings with silence and memory. Elena noticed him immediately, not because he sought attention, but because he seemed to sit apart from the noise, quiet in a way that drew her eyes. Unlike most wealthy customers, he was not demanding. He was simply still, and something about his presence felt fragile. She approached with her professional smile and asked if he would like a drink, expecting wine like most men of his kind. But he surprised her by requesting a simple glass of orange juice. She nodded and fetched it, weaving through the crowd with her tray, the glowing amber liquid steady in her hand. But just as she reached him, a child from a nearby table jumped up and bumped her side. And in that single careless moment, the glass tilted, tumbled, and spilled its contents across the sleeve of Victor's immaculate suit. Gasps rose from surrounding diners, and Elena's heart dropped as she stammered frantic apologies, grabbing napkins with trembling hands, convinced that anger, complaint, or even dismissal awaited her. But to her shock, Victor merely looked down, dabbed the juice, and let out a quiet chuckle, saying it was only juice and far less disastrous than boardroom mishaps he had endured. His calm disarmed her panic, and when she tried to insist on cleaning the jacket, he waved it off and, to her greater surprise, invited her to sit for a moment. Waitresses were not meant to sit with patrons, yet his voice was gentle, not authoritative, but inviting. So hesitantly, she lowered herself onto the edge of the chair opposite him, still clutching the tray like a shield. With faint amusement, he asked if she always served with such dramatic flair. Elena's heart was still racing from the accident, but as she sat there opposite Victor, she began to notice the fine details that surrounded them. The polished surface of the table, reflecting the glow of the sconces, the soft chatter of nearby diners, the clinking of silverware as couples and families enjoyed their meals, the murmur of laughter and whispered conversations that made the restaurant feel alive, with hundreds of small stories playing out at once. A young couple at the table nearby was celebrating an anniversary. With candles and champagne, a group of colleagues in business suits argued over contracts between bites of pasta, and an older woman sat alone near the window, reading a worn novel with her glass of red wine. All of them fragments of lives intersecting in this single room. Yet Elena's world felt narrowed to the silver-haired man across from her, whose calm gray eyes carried both wisdom and weariness. She tried to rise, conscious of her duties, but Victor gestured gently for her to stay, and though she hesitated, her curiosity overpowered her discipline, for there was something about him that was not like the other wealthy patrons who barked orders or waved impatiently. Instead, his gaze was thoughtful, almost searching, as though he was not only looking at her uniform but trying to read the person inside it. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly, and though he did not explain, Elena saw a softness in his expression that suggested he was recalling his late wife, and she did not press him further, sensing the fragility of memory in his voice. Instead, she asked lightly about his choice of juice, teasing that most men in suits ordered wine, and he smiled faintly, replying that he had grown tired of alcohol's false comfort, preferring the simplicity of something pure, something that reminded him of mornings instead of nights. Elena found herself smiling at the unexpected honesty, and though her shift had her running between tables, In that moment, she lingered, drawn into his words. Around them, the restaurant pulsed with life. Children laughed, cutlery rang. A waiter uncorked a bottle with a pop that made diners clap. But between Elena and Victor, there was a bubble of stillness, as though time had slowed just for them. She confessed, almost without meaning to, that she loved music. That sometimes, when she carried trays, she imagined they were sheet music and her fingers were striking piano keys. And when she realized she had spoken so freely, she flushed, embarrassed, but Victor did not laugh. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his hands on the table, and asked her why she had never pursued it. For a moment, Elena wanted to tell him everything, about her mother's illness, about bills and responsibilities, about how dreams became luxuries when survival took center stage, but she swallowed her words, simply saying, "Life took me a different way." Victor studied her silently, the weight of his gaze heavier than any words. As the night deepened and the flow of customers slowed into a gentler rhythm, Victor remained at his corner table, his glass now empty, his hands resting loosely on the wood as his mind drifted far beyond the walls of La Serenata. For in Elena's presence, something long buried had begun to stir. Memories of his wife Isabella, who had once sat across from him in this very restaurant, laughing softly at his clumsy jokes, her eyes alive with a light he had not seen since she left this world a decade ago. And as he watched Elena moving gracefully between tables with her tray balanced, he felt echoes of that same warmth, not because she resembled Isabella in appearance, but because she carried that same quiet dignity, the same spark that turned ordinary movements into something meaningful. He closed his eyes briefly, and in the hum of clinking glasses and hushed conversations, he heard again the strains of piano music. His wife used to play at home on evenings when business had worn him down, melodies that reminded him life was more than profit and loss. And opening his eyes to reality, he saw Elena humming faintly under her breath as she polished glasses at the bar, her fingers moving in subtle patterns as though striking invisible keys. And in that small, almost hidden gesture, he recognized her longing. Later, when she brought him a refill, he asked gently, "Do you play?" And though she hesitated, startled by the question, she admitted that once, long ago, before her mother's illness and the endless cycle of bills, she had dreamed of studying music, that the piano had been her closest friend, that she still remembered the touch of the ivory keys beneath her fingertips, though now her hands knew only trays and dishes. Her voice trembled slightly with the vulnerability of confession. But Victor did not laugh or pity. He simply listened with the kind of attentiveness Elena rarely received. And in his silence, she felt a validation she had almost forgotten existed. For a fleeting moment, the roles reversed. He, the wealthy man with a lifetime of achievements, looked not powerful but human, fragile, as though her words had reminded him of something he too had lost. And she, the waitress, felt not invisible but seen. Around them, the restaurant continued its symphony of lives. The anniversary couple exchanged a kiss over dessert. The business group dissolved into arguments about profits. The solitary woman turned another page of her novel. Yet none of it pierced the stillness forming between Victor and Elena, a stillness rich with unspoken understanding. He told her softly about his own regrets, how he had once wanted to paint, to capture color and light, but had traded brushes for balance sheets, and how success had left him with a name in the papers but an emptiness at home. She listened with wide eyes, realizing that even those who seemed untouchable carried wounds hidden beneath their polished exteriors. Their conversation was brief,